Greetings and welcome to this edition of
Positronic.
I'm Barry P. Cook, and I'm here to talk about the latest episode of Batwoman, entitled Armed and Dangerous. And before I get into my thoughts on the episode, I want to remind everyone, I guess, that at the end of my last Batwoman review, I think I said, if I'm not mistaken, that I was a little trepidatious about this episode, which at the time was the coming episode, because it looked like they were going to go all SJW and hit the audience over the head with a message about racial bias in the police department and racism in general and all of that. And I was dreading it because while I don't mind hearing those messages, other people do. If not in general, definitely when it's a message that's conveyed during a genre show or film, Star Wars, superheroes, Doctor Who, stuff like that. So I was afraid that this show was going to be very heavy-handed in its approach or examination of the shooting of Luke Fox, and that it would damage the show because people would dump on it for doing that. I was glad to see that the episode was not as heavy-handed as I was afraid it was going to be, and I actually liked the episode quite a bit. So let's break down the episode. The first thing that happened is you see that the cop involved in the shooting lied and said that the shooting victim, in this case Luke Fox, had a gun. This is not an uncommon thing in real life. This happens. Well, I shouldn't say it's not uncommon. This is a thing that happens in real life. Cops drop guns on people that they've shot that were not those people's guns sometimes, to make it what they call a good shoot, so that they don't get screwed, that they don't get fired, get prosecuted, and so forth. They're called drop guns, if I'm not mistaken. And so this is something that happens. When they don't actually drop a gun, they still claim he had a gun, but he tossed it away. So that happens all the time. Cops lie about that stuff. In fact, there's a case now in the news where a cop is lying about his fellow officer having been shot by a suspect that he himself then shot. It didn't happen. The fellow officer was in fact shot by the cop who shot the unarmed person. At least that's how it looks from, I think, the body cam footage. This shit happens. So I think it's important that our media, be it news or fiction stuff, Law and Order, FBI, other police procedurals, tell stories about when these things happen, because they happen. So they decided to tell one of these stories in this episode of Batwoman, and I think it was a good thing. Again, I was afraid that it was going to be heavy-handed, and it turned out not to be, so I was glad for that. Anyway, the cop lied. Then we find out that Mary wants to try to save Luke by using the desert rose flower because he's in really bad shape. So she's going to try to concoct a potion, I guess, like she's done before, and deliver that to him in the hospital. Meanwhile, Alice is still trying to help Kate, who of course thinks she's someone else. So she's going through the patient files at the office of the dead Enigma, the psych doctor, and she seems to come across a bunch of files on the whole Kane family and sort of realizes that Black Mask is obsessed with the Kanes, that he's been having Enigma look into all of them and so forth, build up files on all of them. So she decides to go off on her own to help Kate because Ocean shows up and, gives her kind of more pushback on what she's trying to do. And she's like, fine, I'll just go do it myself. Then we flash back to Ryan, who is out on the road as Batwoman in the Batmobile, chasing down the guy who was actually trying to steal the car that Luke was accused of trying to steal by him, which ended up getting him shot. She manages to chase him down. She gets a hold of him and she gets the story from him because she wasn't there. She didn't know what happened, but he explains, look, the cop thought he had a gun and so they shot him. So now Batwoman knows what happened. Luke, meanwhile, is having a near-death experience in the hospital. He sees his dad and he tries to go over to him. But Bruce shows up and stops him and he says, look, if you go see your dad, that's it. You're committing to being dead. If you don't and you hang on, you might be able to survive this bullet wound and survive. But the moment you surrender to sort of the afterlife, it's over. You can't go back. You've given up at that point. Now we find out that the cop that shot Luke goes by the name of Russ Tavarov, if I'm saying that correctly. And we may have known this already because I think he was in previous episodes, but I didn't really pay attention to, what his name was. But last night when they mentioned his name, I said, well, they made a specific point of mentioning his name. Let me go look it up. And it turns out that this is a character from the comics who existed as far back as 2011. And he's always had a beef with Luke Fox. He's always had something against Luke Fox. So in the comics, his sort of raison d'etre, as they say in France, his reason for being is to kill Luke Fox. He happens to be crazy from bad snakebite, which I guess was infused with something called venom. So snakebite is also from the comics, which I did not know. Anyway, on the show, Ryan confronts this guy and as Batwoman, and she ends up getting knocked down by a car driven by one of his henchmen or his fellow crows that are in cahoots with him. Then we flash over to Alice at her train headquarters, her underground train car headquarters. She's arguing with Ocean. She's trying to explain to him that she wants it all. She wants him and Kate. He seems to think, you need to give up on Kate. She's like, no, I'm not going to do that. And so they sort of argue, but then they make up and start smooching. So I guess they're going to be good going forward. I don't know. But anyway, they didn't argue anymore after that. Now, the body cam footage, quote unquote, of the shooting is released, and it turns out that it's been faked. They literally deep faked a gun into Luke's hand to make the shooting look legit. But Sophie has a plan to get the original footage and clear Luke's name. And Sophie, don't forget, has quit the Crows. Ryan kind of blames herself for him getting shot. She says, she gave him crap in previous days, which actually took place in the last episode, for sort of just keeping his head down and muddling through life and not being any kind of, not being an activist in any way and sticking up for the rights of people of color. And so that's the reason he tried to intervene in the car theft. And that's the reason he ended up getting shot. But Sophie tells her, no, it's not your fault. You're being crazy. Now, Mary is she's finished this concoction from the Desert Rose at this point. She's trying to get it into Luke. So she goes to the hospital, but she's being blocked by a couple of cops, crows, I should say. And she gives them the whole, do you know who I am? And blah, 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 but they don't care. So she comes up with a plan B, which is to get a hold of Wolf Spider, who was in a bunch of episodes before. He's the art dealer who was also an art thief. Weird. Anyway, he kind of does like a Spider-Man thing, climbs on a wall. I guess it's a Spider-Man, Batman, Batwoman thing. But anyway, he's kind of like one of them, and he climbs buildings and flies around on, lines and stuff. And he basically breaks into the hospital through the window and administers the Desert Rose to Luke, while Mary distracts the guards by going over and saying, I'm sorry, I was cantankerous with you earlier and, kind of a wise ass. Here's some coffee. And Luke is successfully given the Desert Rose cure that's supposed to help him. Now, while all this was happening, Sophie had gone and confronted Daddy Kane. I guess his first name is Jacob. I hadn't remembered that up to now. But anyway, she goes and confronts him and explains, look, this Tamarov guy who's on your team is bad. And in the past, when we knew somebody was guilty, but we couldn't prove it, and evidence showed up at the last minute, we didn't question it, but that was bad evidence. And I'm only realizing it now that this has happened a bunch of times. And he says, yeah, but we put, you know how many lives we save by putting people away in that manner. And she says, it's still wrong. You've got to get this guy. And so he sort of takes her advice and calls the guy in and reads him the riot act and says, I know what you've been up to, et cetera, et cetera. And Tamarov pistol whips him. And they kidnap him, and they're going to try to give him a hot shot of snakebite to kill him. But Batwoman intercedes. Unfortunately, in order to intercede, she had to leave the place she was previously at which was the archive of the body cam footage. She was trying to retrieve it before it got wiped at 2 a.m. and she wasn't able to find it in time, but she still left in order to save Jacob. So the footage, the real footage, is gone, unfortunately, at this point. But because she was able to put Tamarov and his people down and rescue Jacob, the truth did come out, because Jacob went in front of the cameras and said, I know for a fact that Luke Fox did not have a gun. The body cam footage were destroyed, but the footage you saw was altered. And this kind of thing has happened too often, where stuff has been, shenanigans have been pulled. And since I'm the guy that founded the Crows and I'm the majority shareholder, I'm disbanding the Crows, and they're disbanded. That's it. So this, of course, was a parallel to defunding the police. And again, that's fine, because our art is supposed to mirror what's going on in real life. Some people don't like that. They don't say, don't bring current issues into fiction. But why? These are the things we're going through as a people. These are the issues we're struggling with. Why shouldn't our art, whether it's, painted on canvas media, comic book media, TV show media, etc., reflect the struggles that people go through? These are the things that help us understand ourselves, not only in the present, but in the future. Anyway, so it was a parallel to defund the police. I didn't think, as I said, this episode was too heavy-handed. It could have been way more heavy-handed. There were a couple of lines in there that you could say were kind of social justice-y and overly messagey. There was one line where Bruce, in Luke's near-death experience hallucination, kind of says, unfortunately, a bunch of people are willing to believe that you actually shot at the cops first just because you're black. And I didn't think that line needed to be in there. Again, it's true that stuff happens in real life, but you want to depict what's happening in real life without being on the nose if you can. And that was on the nose, where the rest of the episode really wasn't. So it kind of was a departure from what was happening in the rest of the episode. But I don't think that one moment taints the whole episode. That they could have been super heavy-handed about this whole thing, and they weren't. And that's good, because it didn't end up being about cops are racist against black people, as much as it was about cops do shady shit. And they do. So it didn't even necessarily, it didn't come down to a matter of opinion, in other words, where they were saying, as producers of the show, we think cops are racist against black people, which isn't something that can be readily proven, even though there are tons and tons of signs that point to stuff like that. But what can be proven is that cops do shady shit, because they do, and they get caught doing it. So I thought it was great that this episode tackled that, because, if we never tackle these things and it's not in the public consciousness, it just makes it that much easier for cops to continue doing that. And it's the same of any issue. If we don't do stories about the ills of greed, then, and that issue disappears from the public consciousness, then it's easier for people to be greedy and not have a conscience about it. So again, I think it's important that our art and media reflect the things that are going on in real life. Anyway, before the episode ended, we did get a resolution of, what's Luke going to do? Is he going to choose his father, choose to see his dad, or is he going to live? He chooses his father, but surprisingly lives. I think that's because, despite the fact that he was giving up the Desert Rose serum, brought him around. Anyway. So that was good. I thought for a hot second he was going to die. I'm like, well, they're going to kill off this character. It's a decent character. Why would they do that? But they didn't, so that's good. Alice then shows up at Crow headquarters after, the Crows were disbanded, and she makes an appeal to Jacob as his daughter. And she says stuff like, I know this is going to sound crazy, but I have to tell you, Kate is absolutely still alive. And I'm not talking about being held prisoner by a crazy person on an invisible island. I'm talking about, for real, she's here in Gotham and we can get her back. And she even says, Daddy, we can get her back. And I just thought that was so good. And I think they did great stuff with Alice in this episode. In the first season, she was driving me crazy. I couldn't stand the character. In the second season, all that island stuff, I thought it was so bad. And, you know, and to the extent that Alice was involved in that, it was bad, but they're doing good things with this character at certain times. You know, when they get out of their own way with the foolish crap. And I think this character can be brought back. I think this character can be redeemed. And I want to see that so badly because that actress does such a great job. And the character is complex and layered and has heart. She struggles with a dark side. And the, what more could you want in a character on a TV show? It's great. So I want to see them. And for once, what she's doing has nothing to do with I want to commit crime and kill people and hurt people. She wants to get her sister back. How awesome is that? And she calls Jacob daddy. They could play it off that she was just playing a part to get him to go along to get what she wants. But I think she really is feeling it, the family thing. And I think she's coming around, and I think she can be redeemed, and I think she can go back to being Beth. And I want to see that very much because I like the actress a lot. And I think the character itself is good and could be good, you know, even more so if they do the right things with it. And no one will be happier than me if they do. I also want to say that I loved Ryan, Mary, and Sophie in this episode as well. Each character shined quite a bit. They've been doing great things with Mary. I couldn't stand Mary in the first season. I didn't like her very much in the beginning of the second season. She was a totally forgettable character, in my opinion, just a background character. She is awesome this season. And in this episode and the last couple of episodes, the stuff they're doing with her is fantastic. Same for Sophie. Sophie has turned out to be a great character. And you all know that I love Ryan. I think Ryan Wilder is awesome. So I really liked this episode. I had the fortune of replying to a tweet by Javicia Leslie about the episode, and I pretty much said as much of this as I could in the 280 characters, and she actually retweeted it and said that she loved it. So that just made my night. I was thrilled about that. Anyway, that's my review of this episode. I'm very much looking forward to the next episode. We're going to see Diggle. So that's going to be cool. I haven't seen Diggle since forever. Maybe something will come up about the Green Lantern thing. That would be awesome sauce. So we'll see. But for now, I take my leave. And I say again, as always, peace and long life.